And welcome to FPC Fantasy Sunday Live. I'm your host, Kyle Senra. Thanks to everyone who is joining this morning, watching in on the YouTube channel. And you can always comment there if you are on YouTube or on the Full Press Facebook page. You can send your comments, your sit-start questions, any fantasy questions you have, and I'll do my best to answer them all. And yeah, I think as always, a few things I talk about are, for instance, my start-sit decisions, some of the things that I'm doing in my leagues, and kind of what my reasoning is behind it. I've always got a spreadsheet I put together every week where I kind of help make those decisions. So I'll kind of go through that for a little bit, and perhaps it inspires anyone watching, listening with their own start-sit decisions. We'll also talk about the active-inactive list. Usually that becomes fully available. I usually find around quarter to 12 Eastern time, so in about 15 minutes. So we'll talk some lineups first and some start-sit questions first. But yeah, I think I'm excited to be here. It's week 14. I know for some people I guess for a lot of people it's the final week of the regular season. For me it's for a lot of leagues it is. For some leagues, I mean, it actually is the first week of the playoffs. Various reasons why. Which there could be valid reasons. I know I've listened to some podcasts and some shows kind of saying like, no, should not have week 14 at all. Playoffs with the bye, and I mean some cases you don't have a choice. Like I'm in a 24 team league, 12 teams make the playoffs, so it's got to be 4 rounds of playoffs, and rather than play week 18, which is a championship in week 18 would be awful, we think, rather have the first round have some buys in it. So it's it is what it is. But yeah. So yeah, I think that'll be interesting. So again, feel free at any point to ask any questions, comment, and I think might do a bit of DFS talk after, but a little bit of a twist on that. Not the usual conventional DFS talk, at least what you'd be expecting. So you can throw tomatoes at me if you want. It would be red. Go Canada, go, and I'll hint at that for now, and we'll talk a bit about that later. But yeah, starting with start-sit decisions, I think. Again, this week is tricky, and I think one thing that my best friend Akili and I were kind of just talking before I got on, just on the phone, kind of just consulting each other on our own various lineups. But he and I were both struggling with the idea of playing Darrell Williams in the same lineup as Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and kind of like the pros and cons behind doing that. Just thinking that I think the idea is the Chiefs have struggled this year, but every time, like since Mahomes has been there, they've played the Raiders, they've put up tons of points. And even this year, middle of a bad stretch where, like I wrote about an article about this, where like the Chiefs over the last 6 weeks have only put up more than 22 points once, and it was against the Raiders, and they put up over 40. So they haven't scored 30 points in probably like 2 months now, but they've put up 40, and it was against the Raiders. So even in as what seems to be a struggling offense, the Raiders seem to be a good remedy for that. So kind of thinking both I think could be good solid options. So kind of just toying with that idea. And so I've got one league in particular where I've kind of deciding that am I going to go Williams in the same lineup as Edwards-Helaire? And I've kind of come to the conclusion of yes, and I'll share my spreadsheet here in a second. And I think that a lot of it is just I think that offense could score a lot of points, but I think as a result, it's going to go down to not just the wide receivers. Obviously, Hill and Kelsey, we expect to have big weeks for both of them, but I think it'll trickle down to where both running backs are viable. And I think that's where a justification in certain lineups with a certain right number of players. Obviously, if I had better options, I think that I'd feel more confident in, then I would not play both backs. But I think for now, I'm looking at it as in some cases the highest ceiling option. And again, in this one league in particular, where I guess the setup for that is this is the final week of the regular season in that league, and there are a bunch of teams that are they're I'm trying to remember. I think it's the 4 seed through I think it's the 8 seed. We're all 6 and 7. So legit, anyone could make the playoffs from that group. And then I think like the next 3 teams below that are like 5 and 8. Like 3 teams have clinched and 1 team has been eliminated, and everyone else in the middle is all still alive. So it's crazy week for that. So it just feels like it's one of those weeks where, like, even if I win my matchup, I still need to score enough points to ensure I get a top 6 spot for total points as being the first tiebreaker. So it's kind of one of those where, okay, you'd like a certain amount of security and floor, but I kind of feel like I need to chase the ceiling to not just ensure the win, but also ensure better placement in the standings. So let's share this. So just give me 1 second here. No. Share screen. And again, I do this spreadsheet sort of every week. And is kind of, again, what I do is I don't do it for every single league I have, but I'll go through like certain leagues. Okay, I'll make instinctive decision in some leagues where I feel like these, and the ones where it's a real struggle, where I'm having a hard time, I'll input this all into the spreadsheet, and then from there, kind of try and decide how I'm going to go about it. So let's share this. Yeah, so you can see this is kind of what I work every week. And so we're going to start right at the bottom here with this league. So this was slightly bit complicated because there were 2 decisions really to make. One was deciding my tight end between Noah Fant and Gerald Everett. And then the other decision was, do I play one of those 2 tight ends as a flex? Now, in this particular league, the charity league, the setup is it's wide receivers only get, like, wide receivers get the full PPR, but then backs get a little more. I think it's 1.5, and then tight end 2 PPR. So, like, I've got AJ Green as a wide receiver, potentially viable option. He's put up some good weeks this year. But ultimately, my decisions right now are going with Noah Fant as the tight end over Gerald Everett, and then going with Darrell Williams as the flex over both Everett and AJ Green. So what does the spreadsheet entail? And for those who've watched multiple weeks, I've explained this before, but I look at player production so far through the season. I think 13 weeks of games gives us a pretty good idea of what a player is capable of producing. I think 13 NFL weeks of games. Most players who've played the full season up to this point have played 12 games. So like that data is pretty good. Okay, what have they done? What's the range of outcomes that they've been able to produce this year? Not to say that they can't outproduce those numbers in the fantasy playoffs and give their best games, but just to give like a realistic expectation. The defensive rank, which is like the fantasy points allowed per position. So again, for this league, like for the tight ends, actually, Sleeper doesn't track it. Usually I get that data from the websites themselves, like where I can get a lot of these fantasy production points from, is just the actual platform I'm playing on. Sleeper doesn't track those anymore. I've had a hard time finding them, so I don't include that as much. But what I do look at is the DVOA as well as the O-line ranking. So where I do have the defensive rankings are leagues where are not on Sleeper. That's kind of what that distinction is. So if you ever see these blankets, you can tell those are leagues on Sleeper. So DVOA and O-line rankings, I get both of them from Football Outsiders. DVOA stands for Defensive Adjusted Value Over Average, and I'm looking specifically at the defensive DVOA for the teams for their opponents, right? So like, again, for Darrell Williams, I'm looking at the Raiders' defensive DVOA. For Noah Fant, I'm looking at the Lions' defensive DVOA. And like just what defenses are better. Just like overall NFL defenses are just better quality or worse quality. And it's based on the average production per play. So I think like anything that's positive numbers means the defense is allowing more than average production. So like, looking at this, Noah Fant, the Lions have a DVOA of 9.6, whereas the Texans only 2.8. So like you say Lions, Texans, both of those defenses are bad. Like both those teams are bad. Like you do whatever you want against them. But like looking at this defensive DVOA, it's saying the Texans defense isn't quite as bad. Like it's still a below average unit. They're allowing above average production, but not quite to the level of say the Lions, who are basically triple as three times as bad as what this Texans defense is. So that was kind of something I factored in heavily. And then the O-line rankings, Football Outsiders has a bunch of different ones. What I look at for the running backs is adjusted line yards. And then for every other position, so quarterbacks, wide receivers, tight ends, anything pass catching related. And I guess running backs apply this to a certain extent, but I look at for the other positions, it's their adjusted sack rate. So adjusted line yards for running back, adjusted sack rate for every other position. This is just the ranking, where they rank. Then I have the implied total. So each team, what's the odds makers projected total for that team this week, knowing what teams are supposed to be the highest scoring or expected to be the highest scoring. Yards per team attempt is a stat I get from Peter Howard. It kind of says it in the name. It's the yards that a player gets divided by the number of attempts that a team has total. So that's passing and rushing attempts, and it's a per game thing. So it's just if you want to do it yourself, you can calculate that yourself by looking at the player's yards and then going into each one of the games that player played in, and then adding up the number of attempts total in those games. So passing and rushing attempts total in all the games that the players played. You divide the yards by those attempts, and that's what you get. So higher number means the player's more involved per play, seemingly. Like they get more yards for the average attempt than someone who has a lower number there. So again, looking at this, it's funny that Daryl will so again, between Noah Fant and Gerald Everett, this is actually the one spot where Gerald Everett is better than Noah Fant. Fant's yardage has not been great this year, 0.37 compared to 0.52, but that's one of the few categories where Everett beat Fant. Like almost every other category, like again, the O-line rankings better, the implied totals higher, red zone targets, Noah Fant's been much more involved, and the goal line guide, which is finally my invention. It's something I use every week to kind of better predict touchdown scoring, but both rushing and passing. And so all those factors together gave Noah Fant kind of a serious edge over Everett. And then if I took all those factors again to decide between the tight end, the wide receiver, and the running back, Everett, Green, and Williams respectively, Darrell Williams led in most of those categories. So that's kind of what I'm using as my reasoning to play both Darrell Williams and Clyde Edwards-Helaire in this case, in this league, going with the double running backs there, two running backs in the flex with Eckler and Montgomery, and then just trying to fit everything else, and then leaving Green and Everett on the bench. A couple of the decisions I've had. This league here is another sleeper league. It's a half point PPR, half point per first down, and then there's a slight tight end premium. I think but it only applies to the receptions, not the first downs. Tight ends get 1 point per reception. So I was initially thinking James O'Shaughnessy getting the targets with the Jags, but kind of going through with this, I also picked up Godwin Igwebuike from Detroit. But I think the fact that Ty Johnson might be the lead back for the Jets also is kind of leaning me towards this. He's produced this year without really being the number one guy yet. So best fantasy ceiling of so far. Now, Igwebuike's probably going to get the most carries he's ever seen in his career in this game. So he's probably also going to eclipse this ceiling. But yeah, my initial instinct of going with O'Shaughnessy, there's not a lot of reasons to play him though. So a lot of factors heading towards Ty Johnson's favor. Well, and I mean, there are some factors that do lead in O'Shaughnessy's favor, like the DVOA, Titans defense, not great. The O-line, the Jags O-line's actually been pretty decent this year, both running and passing. But then there's a bunch of other reasons, like he has 0 red zone targets, and the goal line guide grade is not good anyway. His yards per team attempt, and again, this is a per game basis, so O'Shaughnessy is not punished by the games he missed, but the games he's played, his yards per attempt are much lower than two running backs, which to be fair is usually the case. Igwebuike's is pretty ridiculous at 2.16 because he's barely played. Might have only barely been active. So and in those games, he's just put up huge yardage totals. So that one, I think I'm going with Ty Johnson there. Last one, and this is my biggest decision because this is a league where the playoffs are starting. This is that 24-team league I was talking about. So the first round of the playoffs is the top 2 teams of each conference get a bye. So 1-2 seed in each conference bye. So 4 teams on bye this week who will automatically get into week 15. Now, teams 3 through 6 in each conference, so there's 4 on each side, play an all-play, but only against each other. So each conference has a separate all-play system. So one conference, there's 4 teams going against each other. The top 2 advance. Whoever the 2 highest scoring teams. It's not head-to-head. It's just an all-play. Same thing on the other conference. So so right now I'm matched up with 3 other people, and of the 4 of us, the two highest scorers will make it. So it's like, and again, really good team. So leaning towards the ceiling more than floor. Like you see, like I color code a lot of like, okay, what's the best and worst? This one I completely ignored floor. As much as I put them in, I put it just to have the data in there, but I really didn't factor it in at all into this decision because, frankly, I'm not just beating one person. I've got to beat two people. Now really I love to beat three people and be the highest score, but like I've ultimately got to at least beat two other people. So to me, it feels the need to elevate the score. And this is a 2-copy league. Like I know I've got one of the Kyler Murray copies, but I'm also going up against a Kyler Murray copy. So it's not like I'm not getting the full advantage of Kyler against all 3 teams. Do have him against 2 teams, but still. So it's kind of tricky. And I ended up needing to, and I might, I'm not everything's fully decided yet. This is if Deebo Samuel in, but if Deebo Samuel's out, I need to start 4 people, and I couldn't really decide between. So got a couple of running backs: Darrell Williams, Devontae Freeman, Devin Singletary. I guess 3. I said a couple. Quadri Olson as well. Again, back to James O'Shaughnessy. So again, today's theme is Darrell Williams and James O'Shaughnessy. Demarcus Robinson, Chester Rogers at wide receiver, and then Tyler Higbee at tight end. So trying to go through and decide, so the first thing I did was I separated running back and pass catchers. I think I had 4 of each. So then what I did is I color coded, okay, the highest among the running backs is in green, and the lowest among running backs in red, and then vice versa for the pass catchers. And then what I do is what I go through is I count, so if you're the highest scoring stat or among the highest score, I put you in red otherwise. So what I did is I went through and I counted what's the difference between green spots and red spots, and that's what this first column is for numbers. The first thing that was obvious to me was Quadri Olson is last in a ton of categories and he's not first in any. So it was, Quadri Olson is not in this decision. So I took him out kind of right away. And that's the first thing I do when there's a complex decision like this. Like I've got to pick 4 guys and I've got 8 options to choose from. So I've got to basically pick between half of this. So how do I divide and conquer? And one of the first things I do is at the top or bottom, where can you make an easy decision? And the easiest one was taking out Quadri Olson. Then what I did was, because I have to start 4, this column here is counting the number of times a player was top 4 in a category. And again, Darrell Williams stood out as the highest in both instances, the difference between the highest and lowest in any category, but also the times he was top 4. 7 times. So right away, then that meant, okay, I should play Darrell Williams. So then I took him out of the decision on the opposite side of Olsen. All of a sudden, I'm taking him out to say I'm benching him for sure. And Williams, I said I'm taking him out to play him for sure. The other thing that became obvious after that was James O'Shaughnessy was only top 4 in 2 categories. And again, he was a -3 difference. Again, he's last in quite a few categories, not first in any. So I kind of took him out too. So then it suddenly, instead of having to decide 4 starters out of 8, I've narrowed it down pretty easily to I have to pick 3 starters out of 6, out of 5. 3 out of 6. So it was 4 out of 9 initially, and then whittle it down to 3 out of 6. So that made it a little easier. So then what I did here was I recalibrated, okay, what's the highest in any stat out of this group of 6? And then what's the lowest? And then what's how many times were they the highest in something? How many times were they the lowest? And what's the difference there? So the first thing that was obvious was Devin Singletary had a negative differential. He was lowest in the defensive ranking. So the Bucs, great defense specifically against running backs, wasn't the lowest in anything, but wasn't the highest in anything either. Close to being the highest in red zone usage, slight edge to Devontae Freeman though I gave there. But then also what I saw was Christian Kirk is highest in 3 categories, lowest in none. Chester Rogers was highest in a few categories, lowest in none. And then this was simply, I think at this count here was just simply who's top 3 in the most categories. So basically once I had kind of 4 different ways of analyzing the data, 4 different kind of counting ways of kind of ranking what I'm seeing. I've got all this data here, but how do I rank it? I've kind of ranked it in 4 different ways between this 6 group of players. So what then I did is I just kind of looked at these numbers. So what I see is the highest here is Christian Kirk. The highest here is Devontae Freeman. Highest here again, Rogers, Kirk, and then highest again, Devontae Freeman. So what I'm seeing is Devontae Freeman is never the lowest in anything. He's the highest in a couple spots. And again, this league is tiered PPR scoring, but also a extra, like it's 0.15 point per carry. So running backs do get a bit of an edge. So I did go Devontae Freeman there as well. So put him in the lineup. And then suddenly I've now only got to decide 2 starters out of 5. So slowly whittle the way down decisions. That's when I have really complex decisions like this, where it's a ton of players. I'm not really sure where to go. I look at everything as a whole and then try and see, is there something that stands out on either the top end or the bottom end? Top end, it was Darrell Williams. At the bottom end, it was Quadri Olson, and then to a certain extent, James O'Shaughnessy. So take those 3 out, put Darrell Williams in the lineup, ensure Olson and O'Shaughnessy are on the bench, and then suddenly whittle down the decision more. Put Devontae Freeman in the starting lineup. Ultimately, I decided in this lineup, not only am I starting Darrell Williams, I'm also starting Tyreek Hill. Demarcus Robinson's numbers here aren't fantastic anywhere, not horrible, but it was enough to kind of say, I really don't want to start 3 Chiefs players. I've already got 2, and again, I'm trying to get the most upside possible, so starting 3 Chiefs players to me didn't seem optimal. So I put Demarcus Robinson on the bench. And then it really just came down to, Christian Kirk kind of seems like it's a really good play to have. The other thing about playing Kirk right now automatically is if Deebo Samuel's in, I've got a way to get out with Christian Kirk. Like I can pull out Christian Kirk and put Deebo Samuel in the lineup, which I'd much rather do. If Samuel's playing, he's in my lineup type thing. But not every player is playing early enough to ensure that. So I then put Christian Kirk in the lineup, and now I'm still kind of not fully decided. But basically, Devin Singletary, Chester Rogers, and Tyler Higbee for that final spot. Again, if Deebo Samuel's out. If Samuel's in, then I can just leave all 3 of those on the bench. So that I'm not fully decided, but the Bills play at 4:00 today, which is when the 49ers also play. So I'll get that clarity knowing if I'm playing Singletary, I'll know I'm playing him because Deebo Samuel's out. So what it's really come down to is basically just Singletary or Higbee. Looking at the format, okay, the point per carry for the running back, but the tight end premium 1.75 PPR kind of bounces between those 2. So I'm still not fully decided yet, as I haven't really marked that one, but I basically made that decision instead of, again, I had to decide 4 starters out of 9 players, and I kind of worked my way through to now it's basically a 1-for-1. Do I go Singletary or Higbee? And again, if Deebo Samuel plays, I don't even have to make that decision. Then what I'll probably do is actually leave it till tomorrow and then decide between Christian Kirk and Higbee, kind of like look at what's happened so far today and who do I think has the better chance of sealing tomorrow, and I could kind of analyze that better between the 2 of them. So there's a few things working in a lineup that are not just about the players themselves, but also the timing of when they're playing. So that's kind of what I'm doing lineup-wise. I spent a ton of time on this league because, again, this is a playoff league. So it's extra added like pressure. Both of these other leagues are kind of, I need to win to get into the playoffs. So that's why I focused on these 3 this week, but those were my most important decisions, biggest decisions, trickiest decisions, however people want to view that. So for now, the last thing really to talk about, or I guess there's one last thing after that, but is the active inactive list. So I will quickly look that up and then get back to it and show, kind of just like share who's out right now, like who are the players we should be pulling out of lineups. There's a few questionable players as well, so I'm just going to look that up real quick and give you that full list. I usually use RotoWire, but there's tons of different websites that kind of update this on Sundays. I don't know, RotoWire is the one I've used. I've just find it updated quickly, and it's pretty clear, easy to read and easy to get through. So I'll look that up real quick and share with you all the players who aren't playing today. Okay, so looking here, we're going to go through team by team. The Falcons, there's really nothing of note in terms of inactives. Actually, something that's interesting. Normally you see Wayne Gallman inactive, but he's not. So it looks like all 4 Falcons running backs will be active today. So you've obviously got Cordell Patterson as the top guy, then Mike Davis, Gallman, and Quadri Olson. Like, to me, the only one that's playable out of those 4 is Cordell Patterson. And just because of his, not just the running, but the pass catching as well. If anything, it's more the pass catching than anything. But yeah, I don't like I don't. I think there's one league where I'm forced to start Davis in. It's a team that's out of the playoffs anyway, so it doesn't even really matter. But like outside of like where you're really stuck and you have no choice, I'd avoid the Falcons running backs that aren't named Cordarrelle Patterson, just because there's four of them active. We have no idea what the split's going to be like. For the Ravens, nothing surprising inactive here. Miles Boykin, Nick Boyle inactive. Patrick Ricard at fullback. Those are like the fantasy relevant players inactive. For the Panthers, nothing really fantasy wise of note to talk about. For the Browns, tight end Harrison Bryant is inactive. And also wide receiver Anthony Schwartz, the rookie. So what that leaves is, and I'm pretty sure David Njoku, if I'm not mistaken, is still on the COVID list. So he wouldn't be listed here because he'd be like on it. It's like they won't list injured reserve players on this active list because they're not on the active roster. This is just the players who are available on the active roster, not on injured reserve. But are they going to be active on game day? Because not every 53 player on the 53 man roster is active on game day. I think teams are only allowed like 39 or 40 players, if I'm not mistaken. So some of these are healthy scratches, but other of these are injuries. But interesting to see with Harrison Bryant, that Harrison Bryant's inactive with David Njoku out. So I don't know. Maybe there's some talk that David Njoku activated off the COVID list. I didn't notice that. I wouldn't really be looking to play him anyway. I still think Austin Hooper is probably the one tight end you want to play if you're going to play any, but that's not a situation I really want to stick to. So Jarvis Landry, well, he's not on the inactive list. So Jarvis Landry is playing. I think he's probably outside of course, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, the two running backs. Jarvis Landry is probably the next most playable player on the Browns. If you want a high upside shot, I could see Donovan Peoples-Jones as well, going with those receivers, but I really don't like the Browns tight ends. I'm just going to look up real quick on David Njoku to be sure, but I did not see that he was active or that he was COVID list. Maybe I missed that. So I'm just going to David Njoku has not been activated off the COVID list, so I don't know if Harrison Bryant's hurt, and that's because I don't see it being a healthy scratch in this case. If they're already in need of tight ends, but like if Austin Hooper is the only tight end there, I think he suddenly is viable. Never mind, so I'll take it back. I think Hooper does become playable again. I probably still like a low end top 20 tight end at the very best. Looking at the Cowboys, Tony Pollard inactive. That's probably going to be the biggest one today because he was questionable. So I think from all the reports through the week, it seemed like he was leaning towards not playing, but still was questionable going into today. So now we got that confirmation that Tony Pollard is out. As much as Zeke's been struggling of late, I kind of view him as a top 5 back this week. I think he's right on that cusp of being in the top 5. Matchup against Washington was great for Josh Jacobs, even though the team barely scored. Jacobs did fairly well last week. So, I think Zeke should have a great game, especially without Pollard. Houston Texans, there's no... I know Brevin Jordan was questionable, but he is not listed on the inactive list. So Brevin Jordan playing, the rookie tight end. I suppose if there's any tight end you're going to play, it's probably him. I'd look to avoid that team as much as possible. I said it on the Full Press Fantasy Pod as well this week with my co-host Brad. We discussed it a little bit. I want to bench every Texan possible, like even Brandon Cooks. Like if I was like, I think I've got him maybe starting 1 or 2 spots where I just really don't have a choice. I don't have any other players, but anywhere I can bench Brandon Cooks, I will do it because I don't like it. This matchup against the Seahawks, I don't like the quarterback situation right now. Tyrod's not 100%, and like if he ever goes out, then it's Davis Mills kind of going in. Like I think it's a situation I'd like to avoid. I don't know that the upside's there. Like because the problem with the Seahawks is like the defense is solid. They've got good defensive pieces. It's just they play such a slow pace of play that it affects the opposing team's offense is not getting enough opportunities. Like I know Scott Connor on the Dynasty and Chill patron channel and all the Dynasty and Chill stuff he does and everything he does really. He's talked about how like the Seahawks are a painful offense for that they're the worst in the league in terms of pace of play. And it hurts their own offense, but it also hurts the opposing team's offense in that there will be less opportunities. So again, if you can bench Brandon Cooks today, I would do it. Jacksonville, Jacob Hollister, a tight end, is inactive. But again, like I've kind of referenced earlier, James O'Shaughnessy still the guy. But again, there's a couple spots where I'm not all that excited to play him anyway. if you're desperate for a tight end, I think he's worthy of playing. He'd be similar to an Austin Hooper, right? Like, I don't think you have to play these guys just because of the opportunity, but if you need a tight end, they're at least getting the opportunity. It's better to look at them than some other options. So again, but probably again, kind of similar to Austin Hooper, close to tight end 20 for me. Chiefs, again, nothing major in terms of players for fantasy being out. Looking at the Raiders, Darren Waller's out, so Foster Moreau again will get the start. Again, he's someone I'd play over James O'Shaughnessy over Austin Hooper, just for that tight end reference. Looking at the Saints, Little Jordan Humphrey is actually inactive. And without Deontay Harris, that means like the main two receivers there are Traquan Smith and Marquez Callaway. Against the Jets, I think they're playable, but again, like Taysom Hill's hurt his hand, so he can't really throw that well. Like, it could be just a run-heavy game anyway. Not crazy about those options, but they're there. And speaking of the Jets, Tevin Coleman inactive, so I've already referenced it. Ty Johnson, looks like he'll be the lead back today for the Jets. I guess like LaMichael Pirine is also going to be active today, so we'll see how much work he gets. Maybe they feel he's someone that they don't trust him, but they trust him to get a ton of carries, so maybe he actually does out-carry Ty Johnson. But I think Ty Johnson's the guy you want because he'll be involved in the passing game, at least to a certain extent. Looking at the Seahawks, so Travis Homer inactive, and I don't think they activated Peterson off the taxi squad or the practice squad this week. So Seahawks running back wise, it looks like it's Rashad Penny, Alex Collins, and DJ Dallas. I think I'd play Rashad Penny out of them, but not something I really want to rush towards and play really any of those guys. For the Titans, Dez Fitzpatrick at wide receivers inactive. So that leaves a wide receiver room of Julio Jones active today, will be playing off the injured reserve yesterday. So he would be, if he wasn't going to be playing, he'd be listed in this inactive list. Now, he might be playing and they might just use him as a decoy or not throw many snaps. So we don't know for sure that he's going to get used, but I get the sense that Julio is probably going to lead the team in targets. Like, I really don't see who else would. Maybe Chester Rogers again, but I'm not really super confident in playing him. You've got Nick Westbrook, Akine. Like, those are your three main receivers, it looks like. And then you probably Jeff Swain is the tight end to have if you're going to have any. Looking at Washington, J.D. McKissick inactive again. So I think that's another great week for Antonio Gibson, and he should be the pass catching back as well as get most of the early down stuff. So should be wheels up for Antonio Gibson. So yeah, so again, the big inactive news today would be Tony Pollard's out. Everything else I think we kind of saw coming beforehand. I suppose the biggest news active-wise, like Jarvis Landry's active after being questionable. Julio Jones active the first time since he's been put on IR this season. I guess other big implications. But again, J.D. McKissick out again. It means it should be a big week for Antonio Gibson. Again, little Jordan Humphrey, that might just be that big blowout week for the Saints a couple weeks ago. Maybe people were going to play him, but you can't now because he's inactive. And again, a couple of Browns inactive. Inactives are Anthony Schwartz, Harrison Bryant at tight end, and David Njoku at tight end, which leaves Austin Hooper as the main tight end. Landry and Peoples-Jones is kind of the main two wide receivers. Yeah, so that was the active list for week 14. Now, aside from just being week 14, it's also, go CFL, go Hamilton Ticats. It's the Grey Cup today. So one thing I was going to just quickly look through was some CFL DFS for anyone playing DFS for the Grey Cup. I will say, so looking at the two team's quarterbacks, you've got Zach Collaros with Winnipeg, and then you've got Dane Evans starting for Hamilton. Jeremiah Masoli's been the main starter for most of this year. Personally, what I'm seeing in terms of pricing is not enough of a difference between Collaros and Evans for me to want to go down to Evans. I mean, again, this is a rematch of the Grey Cup 2 years ago. This is the same quarterback matchup in terms of Collaros-Evans. We thought we'd get Collaros-Masoli this year. Collaros being a former Ticats quarterback, so that interesting dynamic. And Masoli was the guy that was, replace Collaros. They moved on from Collaros because of Masoli. So it would have been interesting to see them both start against each other. But, I flash back to the Grey Cup 2 years ago. Dane Evans, first drive of the game, throws a really bad interception. Winnipeg scores points off the turnover, and they take the lead, and they never give up that lead, and they just crush Hamilton. So it's the one thing I'll say about Evans is that I think there's a short leash. As much as he is the starter, he replaced Masoli last week in the playoffs. Masoli fumbled early in the game, and Hamilton was down 12-0 at halftime. Dane Evans came in just before halftime and at least made the offense look a little better, and then the third quarter came, and they Actually, the first points of the game for Hamilton were special teams, a punt return touchdown. Then after that, it seemed like it got the juices flowing. Evans came in the next drive, scored a touchdown, and just like cemented it, got them the win, and has earned the starting spot for this game. But like with Masoli, how it was one turnover was all it took for Masoli to get benched early in that game when he was struggling. I could see the same thing for Dane Evans. So the one thing I'll say, I think Zach Collaros is the quarterback play. Because the one thing that could happen is the backup Sean McGuire might come in short yardage and rush some touchdowns in. Like, the lowest price, minimum price Sean McGuire might actually be the highest scoring fantasy quarterback of all this. So, like, I think that's how I go about it. I'm either playing Collaros, thinking that he's going to pass for the touchdowns, or I'll pivot all the way down and play the backup quarterback in Sean McGuire. As much as I'm a Ticats fan, I'm not playing a Ticats quarterback in DFS this week. I just don't think the risk is worth it. I don't think the upside is there. I don't think they're low enough in prices to where, like I don't think there's a big enough difference between Collaros and Evans. Like, I think Collaros is going to probably for sure outproduce Evans. The question is, again, does Collaros get the touchdowns, or does he go to the backup quarterback Sean McGuire, in which case you're pivoting down like $3,000 less or more, almost $4,000 less to get Sean McGuire. That's where it becomes worth it. So I'd play a Winnipeg quarterback. And I think, again, from what I'm seeing, different websites, different pricing, I'm seeing Don Jackson from Hamilton actually be the most expensive running back, where I think it should clearly be Andrew Harris, who's been, usually, he's been injured this year, but usually he's the Christian McCaffrey of running backs. Like, catches a ton of passes at times. Like, I think at like 3 or 4 different instances since he's been with Winnipeg over the last 6 years, he's led the team in receptions. Obviously, this case, he was injured for a ton of the season this year. It wasn't the case, but he's someone that just, like, he was the most outstanding player, basically the Super Bowl MVP for the Grey Cup 2 years ago, because he had a monster game, multiple touchdowns, caught a ton of passes. I could see him doing the same thing again. So I think the Collaros Andrew stack is what you want. You pay up for that most expensive quarterback. You pay up, in a sense, for what I'm seeing as the second most expensive running back, which just baffles me. I think, like, Harris especially has to be locked in lineups. Like, I could go Harris and Sean McGuire. I think you can monopolize all the rushing touchdowns, but I like going Collaros, Harris. And then how I would kind of fit into lineups, I think that the Hamilton player I want the most is Tim White. Brandon Banks hasn't been getting the full target share this year. He's struggled with injuries. It seems like Tim White at times is kind of their number one receiver. So I kind of like Tim White at a bit of a discount, and a player that I have avoided in DFS, CFL DFS the entire season because he's been far too priced up. But like, as the season's gone on, entering the season, he was the number one most expensive Winnipeg wide receiver. And even through a few weeks of the season, that still stayed the case. Eventually, Kenny Lawler got up there, and where he's the top guy, and you can make an argument to play him. Like I'm seeing on CFL.ca fantasy, he's $400 more than Andrew Harris. Like, I'd much rather play Andrew Harris. So that's why I don't really love Lawler this week. I think you go down to Rashad Bailey, Nick Dembski, Tim White. Like, that to me is that's the price range I want to pay for receivers. But in order to get Collaros, Harris, Tim White in a lineup, you'd have to go down further to Darvin Adams. And again, I find they've DraftKings, TSN, to CFL.ca fantasy, they all overprice him the entire season, but now he's down there. Like, I see on CFL.ca fantasy, he's down below 6,000. That's to where the price where he's finally you're not risking as much. There was time, I remember weeks where he was like 8,900. It didn't make any sense because he'd catch a big touchdown, but that's it. Like, he wouldn't get the monster target games that you saw Kenny Lawler getting. Even like previous years, like in 2019, it was the same case where he'd had these big ceiling games that would kind of elevate his price, but so boom or bust. And then this year, the boom really hasn't been there. So they finally priced him down to where I think I finally want to play Darvin Adams. It took until the Grey Cup, the final game of the season, but I finally found a week where I want to play Darvin Adams. But anyway, that's some CFL DFS talk for anyone who's interested in the subject. Again, this will be the last time I talk about it this year, but something I plan to do next year. As with all the fantasy content with full press coverage fantasy, but specifically for some CFL stuff, check back next season. Season should kick off in June again. On Twitter at Senra Says for a lot of that. I'll either do articles with Going for Two or just to tweet out some things. So again, at Senra Says for all that info. You can also follow the Full Press Fantasy pod account on Twitter at FPC_fantasy. of course, download the Full Press Coverage app. I say that on a ton of shows. I don't usually say that on the live stream. I say that on the podcast a lot. But yeah, so every week, my co-host Brad and I on the podcast, we talk about rankings debates. We discuss a bunch of players. There's actually if you look at the pinned tweet right now, there's a poll available, and love people to vote on that, retweet the poll for Van Jefferson this week. We had a rankings debate, and that this is something that can continue to debate tomorrow as well, because they play Monday night. But I've got Van Jefferson inside the top 20. Brad has him outside the top 30. So we were just asking people, like, whose ranking do they believe in more? I think I've got him at 18. Brad has him at 34. So people can vote for that and see where they think Van Jefferson's going to finish this week. I know we debated DK Metcalf was a big difference this week. I've actually got him outside the top 24. I do not have DK Metcalf as a wide receiver 2 this week. I have Tyler Lockett inside the top 20. I believe in him more, but DK Metcalf, I've got him at wide receiver 25. So I guess, went 10 minutes over, but I don't think you mind too much. But I guess I'll leave this by saying, not as emphatic as I am with Brandon Cooks. Like, if you got Metcalf and Brandon Cooks, I think Metcalf's for sure the play. But if you've got 2 or 3 other viable options that could be top 24 receivers, I would bench DK Metcalf this week. Maybe it's a bold proclamation here, but he really has struggled. He hasn't finished in the top 30 once I don't think he's finished in the top 30 since Russell Wilson's been back. I think he was wide receiver 33 last week, which is okay. That's a bit of an improvement over, like, some weeks he was like in the 50s and ranked. But to me, I'm still taking a leap to put him in the top 30. I still can't take that full leap in the top 20. So some interesting debates there. So again, you can feel free to check that out again at the Full Press Fantasy Pod, at FBC_Fantasy Pod. I'm on Twitter at Senra Says. Send me all your questions through the week fantasy wise, and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you everyone for listening, watching to this live stream. Good luck today with week 14 matchups. Again, could be trying to get into the playoffs. Could be the first week of the fantasy playoffs. Best of luck to everyone. Go Ticats, go Cats. Grey Cup tonight. This is going to be great. And I hope everyone enjoys this week 14 /Grey Cup Sunday. Bye for now.